Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pints and Politics. My name is Drew. I'm here with Mike, and we have a guest, Alan.
Want to introduce yourself, Alan? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Alan Lysdahl. I'm from Wadena.
Well, military veteran.
Military veteran. Who are you?
I was in the military for 22 years. I was a forester for 25. So that brings me where I'm at today.
Also a hunter and a fisherman, trapper.
Yep.
Yep. And very active up here in politics in Wadena County.
Yeah, and was it you're working on a amendment to the Constitution, right?
Yes, it's called One County, One Senator, where we want to reconfigure the Senate to have it where each county gets one senator. And that would make for equal representation distributed across the whole state, not so there's only power centered in the Twin Cities area.
So the one reason that we've talked about this a little bit and you're pushing this is we see a demographic shift in states across the United States. Minnesota is a prime example where more population is held in the metro, which creates, because our House and our Senate districts are based on population.
Yep.
And more of the population is down in the metro, which ends up giving them unequal representation. If we compare it to the federal level, where you have the House is based on population, but then the Senate is based on two seats per geographical area.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah.
So our founding fathers were very wise when they looked at this. And I don't remember which states it was or which areas, but they looked at the 13 colonies and said, I think it was New York and maybe Virginia, the population was high enough that they could dictate every law that was passed.
Yeah.
And they said to have to balance that out, we can't do it on population. We have to have the House set on population, but then the Senate set on geographical areas. So what you're doing is basically kind of copying an idea from the federal level, from our founding fathers, to give equal representation to all citizens.
Right. And when the majority rules, like it is right now, that's not a good thing. On the state level, when you have pure majority rule, a good example of majority rule is a lynch mob, where the majority rules and the minority does not fare well. And what this would do is give equal representation to all, so that the minority is not being oppressed.
So, question for you, because this has come up, and we've talked about this before off air. Is it expanding government or no? And because we'd be adding about 20 more senators, right?
It would be adding 20 senators, but when you think about expanding government, is it really the number of representatives you have, or is it what the representatives are doing with the resources that they're getting from the citizens and making the government bigger?
Yeah.
So the other thing that I look at and would question a little bit is in the state of Minnesota, we've seen a push, an idea of breaking away and joining South Dakota because of the disenfranchisement of the people. We feel like, and you mentioned it, oppressed or in the minority on greater Minnesota because our voices are not being heard in the metro. It's that great metro versus outstate divide. So rather than have to split the state and join South Dakota, this idea would give equal representation from greater Minnesota geographically back to government. Because I think you said it earlier, the two counties in the metro, primary counties, Hennepin and Ramsey, have how many senators?
Hennepin County has 15 senators in it. Ramsey County has 8. So that's 23 out of 67. That's a disproportion of power. And it's, like you said, I like that term you said, disenfranchised. The voters and citizens of outstate Minnesota are very disenfranchised. That's why when you talk about splitting away to go to a different state where they think they might get better representation, this would unify the state. This would put everybody on equal footing in the legislature.
It'd be a bottom-up approach to legislation because You can go to your county board or you could go to your BPOU and you'll probably run into your senator there
Right.
if this happens.
Yep.
So everything will be more localized. And I'm assuming that the senator is going to have to live in the county that they represent.
Absolutely.
So then they actually get to see better how the county's going and how things go in their community.
And that's a great point, because we know that government closest to the people is the most efficient.
Right.
And your townships, county commissioners, they can respond better. If your senator is in the county that you live in, so I live in Todd, I would have my own senator. Right now, my senator is Paul Utke, who lives up in Park Rapids, which is a 2-hour drive.
About 2 hours.
2-hour drive away. And it's hard geographically for those senators to cover such a huge area where now they can focus on the people just in the county that they.
Yeah, what's that saying? That's in the House, the legislative building. What, Vox Popularum? That's
Vox Popularum est
Vox
Vox
Dei.
Dei.
Yep, the voice of people.
Voice of the people is the voice of God.
Wow.
So now, and this is the other thing. This is not just a Minnesota issue.
No, it's not.
Now, right now out in Idaho and Oregon, they're talking about splitting that state up. And 7 counties, I think
Yeah,
it is.
the
or
counties
something.
actually voted to secede to Idaho, Oregon counties.
Right.
For
So
they-
we're seeing this
Mhm.
this issue, not just in Minnesota. We're seeing it all over Idaho. A number of years ago, I was out in California and talking to some folks out there, and they had the same concerns where the rural areas were not getting represented because the population centers basically,
They
put
dictate.
out vote. They dictated what
Yeah.
was happening.
And so your ward oppression really does show up. And my example from California is actually Los Angeles itself, because they need water and they got to pull all that water in for so many people. The city shouldn't exist the way that it does, but they pull in that water. They're stealing essentially water from like the farm, the people right outside. It's a desert. It's so desolate, and it's so much more desolate because they're pulling that water away from its natural spot.
People in Minnesota, we're used to having a lot of water.
Oh yeah,
But one thing that and I know the Twin Cities area realizes that how dependent they are on outstate Minnesota for their drinking water, because they get their drinking water from the Mississippi River.
Yep.
And where's the Mississippi River start? It starts up here.
Itasca.
It starts up
I
here,
always forget
and
the name.
it goes through how many miles of outstate Minnesota before it gets to St. Cloud, and then it gets to the Twin Cities. We need to take care of it, and I think they're starting to realize that we're all connected. And there's a big connector right there. It's their drinking water.
So another aspect to that, going off of Governor Wall's last campaign statements was one Minnesota.
Yeah.
How do you bring the divide, the rural metro divide, and how do you overcome that? And if he is truly serious about a one Minnesota, this would be a really good solution to that problem.
This would do it. This would unify Minnesota.
You-
This would make all of us proud to be Minnesotans again.
Yeah, I mean, I like Minnesota. I love Minnesota. I'm getting into trapping. I think we were talking one day about doing some coyotes together or something, but trapping is really, Minnesota was founded on trapping.
Yeah.
Fort Snelling was founded to protect that industry.
Yeah.
In Minnesota, we love our natural resources, but hunting, fishing, trapping, the whole thing. You put us on water, we're good to go. And if we centralize too hard, we can lose that. But if we localize, we'll take care of things a lot more proper.
Right on.
So you brought up the water issue, how that affects the metro, but I'm just spitballing this or thinking about it. Greater Minnesota is primarily agriculture.
Yep.
And the products that are produced here, grain, soybeans, milk, cheese, all of these things, a lot of them, one way or another, end up in the metro. And if I recall correctly, I believe it was Hennepin County's second biggest industry is agriculture. And when I read that, that kind of floored me. And that number might not be right. I probably got it screwed up, but one of their biggest industries is still ag. And why is that? Because CHS, Cargill, all of these companies that supply or use ag industry is down in the metro. Well, all of this product from out here in greater Minnesota that's making its way down there, and yet we don't have the same representation because of the way this system is set up.
Right.
And if we simply copy what our founding fathers set up at the national level and apply it to a state level, now we would end up with equal representation, and it would bring people together. And instead of that rural metro divide, we could actually have maybe some commonality.
This is good stuff. This is good.
Yeah. Just yeah, we'd end up working together. You'd have to know your neighbors.
Yeah.
And that's scary.
Interesting concept,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And you've gone to some county
Yeah.
commissioners now and given a presentation.
Yeah, I've been to Wadena, Hubbard, and Becker. On Tuesday, I'm going to Ottertail County.
Okay. How has the response been so far?
They've been very, very accepting of the idea. And one commissioner last Tuesday at Becker County say, I don't see any reason why any Minnesota rural county would not be in favor of this. And it just makes sense, because when this becomes a constitutional amendment, Wadena County, which has 0 senators living in it right now, would have the same power as Hennepin County in the Senate. And if that's not something to make you proud to be a rural Minnesotan, I don't know what is.
Well, and you brought that up, a constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
So this process would have to be a change in our constitution.
Yes, it would.
The House is basically set up based on population. And the population in each of the House districts is 43,000, give or take, people, where the Senate would have to be changed.
Yep.
Because that's based on the population of 86,000. And now we're going to say it would have to be changed to a geographical area, which would mean a change in the Constitution to
Right.
let this up to the people.
Yep.
So that process is kind of lengthy. It would take some legislation to get passed. There'd be a lot of discussion. Timeline. I mean, could we maybe see a constitutional bill next year, but the process might take some time?
The plan right now is that you and Representative Krista Knudsen are going to do the research and draft the bill during the interim here, and then introduce it next legislative session. When does that start? When's the next legislative session?
February?
Well, if we get elected.
Wow.
yeah, first you gotta get elected. It is an election year.
We have to get through that process
Okay.
first. But yeah, if we're elected, we would start beginning of January
Okay.
in 2025.
Okay. So then when it has to pass both the House and the Senate to get on the ballot, and then it would have to go up on the ballot during a general election.
Right. So if it went through, and that's the dynamics that people have to consider, is that these processes do take time, but then educating people, and that's where part of that comes in. A lot of times these ideas start off and they tend to grow. So with this constitutional amendment, educating people on the pros of why this should be done. And sometimes that could take several years.
Good.
And we're lucky that we have 2 years minimum.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's reaching enough people to make that happen and understand why it's important that everybody has a voice in their government.
Yes.
Then we can iron out all the kinks and work on all the arguments, right?
Right.
One of the things that, again, we were talking about, and it's a confusion I guess I don't understand when we talk about the redistricting. Like, we kind of don't have to, because we already have, and that's one of the things
And when you talk about redistricting, another thing that this would prevent would be gerrymandering in the Senate districts. Because you can't change, the counties are what they are.
Yeah.
You don't change it based on population or political motives.
Well, while we're talking about counties, there is one board I got to complain about on the internet. It's Cass County, because if you look at a map and you find Cass County, it makes no sense being the shape that it is, because the county seat's up in Walker, and that's about an hour away from Brainerd, and Pillager is in Cass County, and that's like 5 miles away from Baxter.
Well, but you got to remember, when those counties were laid out and planned out, wasn't the growth in those areas and how things have changed. is really what,
I'm just
we're not
saying,
taking a look at.
you got the county seat in Brainerd, well, like 10 or 15, like not less than 20 miles away. But if you like, I'm not getting pulled over in Pillager ever because if I have to pay that ticket, that's punishment just going there. It's a drive. So I guess that's where I'm at. It's a little
So a little bit of history. Let's look at Todd County.
okay.
So that area, when that was growing up and developed, Little Sauk was almost the county seat at one time. Little Sauk lost in votes by, I think, 3 votes from Long Prairie. Now, if you go through Little Sauk today, there's virtually nothing there. At the time when that was voted, Little Sauk was on the river, which was a main artery. You could go up the Sauk River, you could go from Sauk Center to Little Sauk and bring goods and services product to Osakis and then further points west. When traffic moved from the rivers to the railroads, it changed that stuff. So I'm not sure what changed up in Cass County, but geographically, these arteries, these commerce trails, arteries, corridors, when they changed, it changed things big time. Wadena.
Actually,
Isn't there a place called Old Wadena?
Yep.
oh yeah.
Ferndale was actually the county seat, and then the government of Wadena went down there and stole the charter from Ferndale and brought it to Wadena because they used to be able to steal. Because St. Peter was the same thing; was supposed to be the capital of Minnesota. The guys from St. Paul stole the charter from St. Peter and brought it to St. Paul, and that's where we have the government today.
See, you learn a little bit.
Well,
Just show all
yeah,
the time.
in Otter Tail County, they actually stole the courthouse and took it to Fergus.
So
Yeah.
those things have happened throughout history, and you have to understand. We look at it now, but in the lens of 100 years ago or more,
Yeah.
it was entirely different. The population centers were different. The corridors were different. Now, when I talk about corridors to people, they still think, this is on a major highway. That's not necessarily a corridor anymore.
Yeah.
The freeway, Highway 10 is considered a corridor, but those arteries, those commerce roads or avenues, corridors have changed. That's changed the landscape. And, that's probably
Yeah.
what happened over in Brainerd too. Two converging roads, railroads, whatever. All of a sudden one area grew and the other one didn't.
Yeah. That's interesting. I guess the lesson from this whole history here is change is going to happen. It's not always scary. So if we're going to make a big drastic change to our Constitution, it's probably not as scary as you might think that it is.
Well, and I don't even know that it's a big change, but I think
Really?
it actually equalizes things a
it
lot
does.
better.
Yeah.
And brought up mob. I think we were earlier, whenever we were talking about this, we talked about the majority or mob rule. That's not the way our government was set up. And Thomas Jefferson said he was not in favor of democracies because he said basically democracy is nothing more than mob rule.
That's right.
Where if we have the majority that's dictating everything to the rest of the state with the current setup, oppressing or treating outstate Minnesota like a minority, then we have these problems. And if we want to overcome the problems, we have to come up with solutions. And I think this is one of those ideas that is going to gain traction. We have to have discussions about it now. We have to look at, there's going to be some pros and cons to everything. But if we want to give a true equal voice to everyone in Minnesota, I think this is a good start.
Yeah. And because with this news, with one county, one senator, every bill would have to be passed by a majority of the people in the House, but then a majority of the counties in the Senate. And that would make it so the whole state has a really equal say in what bills get passed and which ones don't.
I don't know about you, Mike, but I really like this idea.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
And we often talk about the exchange of ideas. It's not a bad thing to challenge the status quo.
Oh, yeah.
When we hear people say, well, that's the way we've always done it, if that were the case, we'd all still be riding horse and buggies.
That's right.
When things change, when demographics change, when population shifts, we have to look at those and say, is this system working best for the people now that things have changed? And when we see these shifts, we have to come up with ideas, an exchange of ideas, and say, let's take a look at this.
And another thing that this will do is when these shifts happen, this will protect us from the volatile whims and passions of the masses, where the passions of the people can change violently, where this will temper that and keep it under control.
That almost sounds like a quote from our founding fathers, though. Seriously.
And this idea comes from their ideas.
That was the reason for the balance in
Yes.
government. The House, the Senate, and the President was to be a balance of government. And they did talk about the ever-changing desires of the populace. And government was actually supposed to
Be a stabilizing force in it.
right, it was supposed to move slowly.
Yes.
So that when, the whims of the people, which can happen very rapidly,
Very quickly.
you need to temper that down a little bit. When I talk about the experience of the elderly balanced with the exuberance of youth, the same thing kind of applies to government. The government was supposed to tap the brakes a little bit and say, long term, this is an idea that will not work or is not sustainable. We need to pump the brakes a little bit. So government was supposed to be, in Madison's words, in a nearly perpetual state of gridlock. True.
Yeah.
Only legislation that was supposed to go through had heavily bipartisan support.
Right.
So it was supposed to move slowly. No, this is an interesting idea. It's a great conversation, and I think it's going to take some time, work out all the kinks, but I think it's a great place to start. And at least we're coming up with ideas to deal with the situations that we have at hand.
Right. It's a solution.
Yep.
It's better than sitting back and complaining.
Right. Yeah.
Well, let's build one Minnesota
Yep.
in a real effective way rather than just
Just talk about it.
exactly.
Let's do something about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for
Yeah,
joining
thanks for
us.
coming on. It was
I
great.
enjoyed it.
Do you have any Facebook pages you want to shout out?
I
Website?
got a Facebook page, One County, One Senator, and you can follow this grassroots movement on that.
Okay, awesome.
So check that out on Facebook. I looked at it the other day. You've already got some commissioners and commissioners meetings set up and
Yep.
going. That's great.
Yep, Otter Tail County next Tuesday.
So that's a good start.
Yep. One county, one senator on Facebook.
And,
Right.
and if the counties are in favor of it, isn't that truly the voice of the people?
That's the voice of the
Isn't
people.
much.
Populum vox Dei?
Yep. Well, Alan, again, thank you so much for coming on.
A pleasure.
Um,
Thank you for having me.
Thank you guys so much for watching Pikes and Politics. Drew, Mike, God bless.